Septembre 6, 1943. Tukina Airfield, Bougainville, Solomon Islands. Captain James Jimmy Sweat clenches his jaw, watching the plume of black smoke rise from the dense jungle canopy. Another one gone. His wingman. The pilot's final garbled transmission still echoes in his headset, a ghost of static and terror. This is the third F-4U Corsair VMF 213 has lost this week. They aren't being outflown by superior Japanese pilots. They aren't falling from the sky due to mechanical failure. They are dying because of their own guns. They are dying from impotence, armed with the most powerful fighter aircraft in the Pacific. Sweat's own gun camera footage, played back in the sweltering briefing tent, tells the damning story. He'd tracked an A6M0 perfectly, diving from above, closing to 300 yards. He squeezed the trigger for a 4-second burst, unleashing nearly 400 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. The tracers framed the enemy plane beautifully, a perfect envelope of death, with absolutely nothing in the middle. The Zero, seemingly untouched, jinked hard and escaped. Sweat's guns clicked empty. Less than 2 minutes later, that same Japanese fighter latched onto his wingman's tail with devastating results. The numbers are a death sentence whispered across the flight lines. Despite the Corsair's overwhelming advantages in speed, armor, and firepower, Marine pilots are struggling to achieve a kill ratio better than 3-to-1 against the more agile Japanese aircraft. The Corsair carries 6 Browning M2 machine guns and nearly 2,400 rounds, enough for just 25 seconds of sustained fire. But pilots are emptying their ammo bays and are lucky to score 1 hit for every 50 rounds fired. His squadron, VMF 213, carries the shameful distinction of having one of the worst ammunition-to-kill ratios in the theater, an average of nearly 900 rounds expended for every single confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. At this rate, they'll run out of bullets before they run out of Zeros. The frustration is a corrosive acid in the pit of Sweat's stomach. He watches his friends die, not in heroic dogfights, but in futile sprays of gunfire that accomplish nothing. The problem isn't the men. It isn't the plane. It's something in the engineering, something fundamentally, lethally wrong with their weapons. And if someone doesn't fix it, this deadly frustration will kill them all. On paper, the F-4U Corsair was an airborne predator, a titan of the skies. Its armament was ferocious. 6-wing, mounted, .50 caliber Browning M, 2 machine guns, capable of unleashing a storm of over 70 rounds per second. This was supposed to be the weapon that swept the nimble Japanese Zero from the Pacific. But in the chaos of combat, this theoretical firepower was proving tragically, fatally inefficient. The problem wasn't the guns themselves, nor the pilots pulling the triggers. The problem was geometry. It was a principle as old as aerial combat, gun harmonization. Because the guns were spread across 16 feet of wing, they had to be angled slightly inward to concentrate their fire. This created a convergence point, a specific distance in front of the aircraft where all 6 streams of bullets would meet in a single, devastating cluster. The engineers at Vought Aircraft, following established doctrine, had set this convergence point at a standard 1,000 feet, or about 330 yards. Their logic was sound in theory. This distance gave a pilot adequate time to aim and track a target. But war is not fought in a laboratory. The brutal reality of a dogfight over the Solomon Islands was a swirling high-G ballet of death that occurred at much closer ranges, typically between 200 and 400 yards. At the factory set 1,000 feet, the bullet pattern was a tight, lethal fist. But at the 300 yards where pilots like Jimmy Sweat found themselves, the bullets hadn't converged yet. The 6 streams of fire were still wide apart, forming a massive, diffuse pattern over 20 feet in diameter. The agile A6M0, with a wingspan of 39 feet, was a difficult target. Pilots weren't aiming a rifle. They were firing a giant, invisible shotgun, hoping a few pellets might hit. Captain Sweat's gun camera footage was the damning evidence. It showed exactly what pilots were experiencing. He'd line up a Zero perfectly in his sights, squeeze the trigger, and watch in fury as his tracers painted a perfect frame around an empty space. A stream of bullets would pass over the Zero's right wing, another under its left. The fuselage would fly untouched through the gap in the middle. He was creating a perfect envelope of death with nothing inside. The Japanese pilot, often unscathed, would jink away, leaving the Corsair pilot with hotter gun barrels and less ammunition. This wasn't just frustrating, it was a death sentence. Pilots were exhausting their entire 2,400-round load in a single engagement, scoring few, if any, critical hits. A Corsair that ran out of ammo going Winchester was no longer a predator, it was prey. The Japanese pilots learned this quickly, baiting the Americans into wasting their ammunition before turning to attack the now defenseless fighters. The most powerful fighter in the Pacific was being crippled by a simple, catastrophic flaw in its design philosophy. The math was wrong, and Marines were paying for that miscalculation with their lives. Captain James Swett was a fighter pilot, but his true battlefield was the space between his ears. He wasn't the archetypal hotshot driven by ego and kill counts. He was a quiet, analytical man from rural Georgia who grew up fixing tractors and cotton gins. He learned early that a machine was only as good as its design, and that a problem wasn't solved until you understood exactly why it broke. For Swett, every Corsair spiraling into the jungle, every pilot's voice cut short on the radio, wasn't just a casualty of war. It was an unsolved engineering problem, a fatal equation where the variables were all wrong. While other pilots tried to forget the day's horrors with cards and warm beer, Swett would retreat to his tent, rewatching gun camera footage until the images were burned into his mind. He wasn't just reliving his misses, he was conducting a post-mortem on the physics of failure. He saw the shimmering envelope of tracers pass harmlessly around enemy planes. He charted the patterns, calculated the odds, and felt a cold, rising anger at the sheer, senseless waste. He'd corner ordnance men and maintenance chiefs, peppering them with questions they couldn't answer. Who decided 1,000 feet was the magic number? Was he ever trying to hit a zero at 300 miles per hour? Did anyone actually test this in combat? This wasn't about glory. It was about survival. He felt the weight of every empty seat in the mess hall, every letter that had to be written home. The official doctrine from the engineers back in the States felt like a death sentence written by men who had never tasted cordite or watched a friend die. Swett refused to accept that the best the Marine Corps could do was trade lives at a rate of 3.2 to 1. He believed there was a mechanical truth hidden in the flawed geometry of their guns, a simple adjustment that could turn their flying coffins back into killing machines. He was a man consumed by a single deadly problem, and he was determined to solve it, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. Swett doesn't sleep. He lives in the hot, humid maintenance tent, surrounded by the smell of oil and cordite, projecting his gun camera footage onto a stained canvas sheet. He watches the ghostly tracers envelop a zero, a perfect bracket of death with nothing in the middle. He watches his wingman's Corsair blossom into a fireball. The engineers back in Connecticut have data, slide rules, and theories. Swett has ghosts. He's not an engineer. He's a hunter whose weapon is failing him. The problem, he realizes, isn't about making the existing system work better. It's about throwing the system away entirely. One night, staring at a schematic of the Corsair's wing, the idea hits him. It's so simple, so contrary to every piece of doctrine he's ever been taught, that he laughs out loud. The ground crew chief looks over, concerned. Swett ignores him, grabbing a piece of charcoal and sketching on a wooden crate. The experts want pilots to be snipers, killing from a safe distance of 1,000 feet. But dogfighting in the Solomons isn't sniping. It's a knife fight in a phone booth. The solution isn't to get better at long range. It's to make the Corsair the deadliest knife fighter in the sky. His proposal is twofold: a radical reimagining of aerial gunnery. First, the convergence. Forget 1,000 feet. Forget the cautious field tests at 800 or 600. Swett wants to harmonize the guns to a terrifyingly close 400 feet. At this range, a pilot can see the enemy's face. At this range, the 6 streams of 50 caliber bullets wouldn't be a pattern. They would be a solid pillar of lead and fire, no wider than a dinner plate. The cone of fire that allowed zeros to slip through would be gone, replaced by a focused point of annihilation. It's not shooting, it's a surgical strike with a sledgehammer. The second part of his idea is even more heretical. He wants to change the ammunition belt loadout. Standard procedure dictates a mix of ammunition types, armor-piercing, incendiary, tracer spaced evenly throughout the belt to provide a balanced capability. Sweat sees this as a compromise that excels at nothing. He proposes a concept he calls the shock load. The first 75 rounds in each of the 6 belts would be nothing but high-explosive incendiary rounds. No tracers to give away the shot, no armor piercing for later. The goal is maximum destruction in the first half-second burst. He wants the initial impact to be so catastrophic that it doesn't just damage the enemy aircraft, it causes it to cease to exist. A Zero hit by this shock load at 400 feet wouldn't limp home, it would vaporize. When he presents the idea to his maintenance officer, the man thinks he's joking. When he realizes Sweat is serious, he's horrified. The structural engineers forbid convergence below 500 feet, Captain. The recoil at that angle will tear the gun mounts clean out of the wings. Your wings will literally fold up in a high G turn. The tactical objections are just as loud. You want our pilots to get to 400 feet? A Zero will turn inside you and cut you to ribbons. You're sacrificing our one great advantage, speed, to fight the enemy on their terms. The shock load is dismissed as reckless. You'll burn through your most effective ammunition in the first pass. If you miss, you're left with less effective rounds for the rest of the fight. It's insane. It's suicidal. It violates engineering directives, tactical doctrine, and common sense. But Sweat is unmovable. He holds up a photo of a dead pilot. Common sense is getting us killed, he says, his voice low and steady. The engineers aren't flying these missions. We are. Their theories are failing. My insanity is born from watching my friends die. Let me try it on my plane. If the wings fall off, the problem is solved. An idea is not a weapon. To become one, it must survive contact with reality. Sweat's reality was the United States Marine Corps, an institution built on chain of command, not radical innovation from a line captain. He took his sketches, drawn on the back of a navigation chart, to Major Wade Britt, VMF 213's commander. Britt listened, his face impassive. He saw the logic, but he also saw the mountain of regulations Sweat proposed to ignore. The engineers at Vought spent 5 years designing this aircraft, Jimmy. You think you know better after 5 weeks of getting shot at? The squadron's engineering officer was less diplomatic. Lieutenant Commander Evans laughed out loud. You want to do times what times to the feed mechanism? You'll double the cyclic rate. The barrels will overheat and warp in 20 seconds. The recoil will tear the gun mounts straight out of the wing. It's not just against regulations, Captain. It's suicidal. The skepticism was a virus that spread through the ready room. Fellow pilots, men who trusted Sweat with their lives in the air, now looked at him with pity. Leave it alone, Jimmy, one said. We just need to get closer before we shoot, another joked. If you want to kill Zeros, use your propeller. It's safer than whatever you're building. Ground crews, fiercely protective of their aircraft, were openly hostile. They saw Sweat's idea not as an improvement, but as a desecration of a complex, million-dollar fighting machine. He was a pilot meddling with things he didn't understand. Resources were non-existent. His request for spare parts was denied. His access to the main armory workshop was quietly revoked. He was an outcast with a theory. His only ally was Master Gunnery Sergeant Gunny Henderson, a 20-year veteran ordnance chief who had forgotten more about machine guns than the Vought engineers had ever known. Henderson, a man who communicated in grunts and grease stains, initially dismissed Sweat as just another pilot with a death wish. Regulations are written in blood, Captain. But Sweat was persistent. Night after night, he brought Henderson gun camera footage, showing the wasted ammunition, the escaping Zeros. He didn't use engineering jargon, he used simple physics, drawing diagrams in the dirt with a stick. Gunny, we need more lead hitting the target in less time. That's all. Something in Sweat's desperate logic broke through Henderson's hardened skepticism. The project went underground. After midnight, in a secluded maintenance revetment shrouded by a canvas tarp, the work began. They became scavengers. A high-speed feed booster was stripped from the wreckage of a B-25 Mitchell bomber. A stronger recoil buffer was machined from the landing gear strut of a crashed Hellcat. Henderson, using nothing but a hacksaw, a file, and a portable welding torch, fabricated custom reinforcement braces for the gun mounts. The work was brutal, trial and error engineering under a bare light bulb. They burned their hands, broke tools, and drank gallons of foul coffee. Twice, the modified gun jammed so violently it nearly tore itself from the test stand. But they learned, adapted, and rebuilt. After a week of clandestine labor, Sweat's personal Corsair, Bureau number 17915, was ready. Its 6 machine guns looked no different from the outside, but inside they were something new, something lethal, and something completely dangerously illegal. The test came sooner than anyone expected. 0830 hours, September 19th, 1943. 4 Corsairs from VMF 213 on a routine combat air patrol over Bougainville. Captain Sweat gripped the stick, the plane feeling alien beneath him. Every engineer, every manual, screamed that his aircraft was unsafe. The modified gun mounts could shear off under the recoil, tearing his wings apart in midair. His career was over if this failed. His life was over if the engineers were right. Then, bogeys. 9 o'clock high. A swarm of 15 Japanese aircraft, 9 Zeros escorting 6 Val-dive bombers. The odds were terrible, but standard. Sweat pushed the throttle forward, his heart pounding. This was it. He singled out a Zero at the rear of the formation, diving from above. His instincts, honed over 100 combat sorties, screamed at him to fire at 400 yards. He ignored them. He closed the distance. 350 yards. The Zero pilot began a lazy, evasive weave, expecting the usual wide, inaccurate spray of American .50 calibers. He was a dead man. Sweat held his fire, his knuckles white. 300 yards. The Zero filled his entire gun sight. It felt suicidally close. He squeezed the trigger for a 1-second burst. It wasn't a shotgun blast, it was a buzzsaw. Instead of a scattered cone of tracers bracketing the target, a solid, concentrated beam of fire erupted from his wings. The 80 rounds arrived at the same instant, in a space no bigger than a dinner plate. The Zero didn't catch fire or trail smoke. It disintegrated. The entire tail section vanished. The fuselage shattered. A fireball erupted where the cockpit had been a microsecond before. The debris cloud was so sudden and violent that Sweat had to yank the stick hard right to avoid flying straight through it. He keyed his radio, his voice strained. Splash one, my God. He didn't have time to process it. He was already lining up on the next Zero, 300 feet, a half-second burst. The enemy plane's wing simply tore off, and it tumbled into the jungle below. In less than a minute, Sweat had expended 200 rounds for 2 confirmed kills. Before today, he'd have emptied his entire ammunition load for a few non-critical hits. The game had just changed. This wasn't a dogfight. It was annihilation. Word spreads fast. By the end of September 1943, every Marine fighter squadron in the Solomons is hearing about the Sweat mod. Pilots from VMF 214, Pappy Boyington's Black Sheep, fly over to Tukina just to see the guns on VMF 213's Corsairs, canted inward at what looks like an impossible angle. The results are undeniable, and the demand is immediate. Ground crews work through the nights, modifying every F4U they can get their hands on, turning the entire wing into a close-range buzzsaw. The numbers tell a story of biblical carnage. Before the modification, VMF 213's kill-to-loss ratio was a frustrating 3.2 to 1, with a staggering 890 rounds expended for every confirmed kill. After Sweat's mod becomes standard, their kill ratio skyrockets to over 1:1 to 1. Ammunition expenditure plummets to just 190 rounds per kill. Pilots who once returned to base Winchester, completely out of ammo, now land with hundreds of rounds to spare after shooting down multiple enemy planes. The Corsair hasn't just become effective, it's become brutally efficient. On October 17, 1943, Captain Sweat encounters 6 Zeros over Vella La Vella. In a fight lasting less than 4 minutes, he shoots down all 6. His gun camera footage is terrifyingly clear. At 300 feet, his bursts don't just hit the Zeros, they obliterate them. A half-second pull of the trigger turns a cockpit into a red mist. A 1-second burst saws a wing clean off. He returns to base with 1,320 rounds remaining, enough ammunition to kill 6 more. Lieutenant Robert Hansen, who once struggled to confirm a single hit, shoots down 5 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement on November 11th. He lands, rearms, takes off, and claims 3 more that same afternoon. This is the origin of the 20 kills per minute legend. It was never one pilot achieving this rate. It was the theoretical potential of a full squadron. Picture 12 Corsairs, all equipped with Sweat's mod, diving on an unsuspecting formation of 30 Japanese bombers and Zeros. In the opening 60 seconds of the engagement, with multiple pilots firing simultaneously, each capable of destroying an enemy aircraft in under 2 seconds, the squadron's combined rate of fire could annihilate over 20 enemy aircraft. It wasn't an average, it was a terrifying peak capability, a shock and awe tactic that turned the sky into a slaughterhouse. The mod didn't just improve aiming, it weaponized the entire squadron as a single, devastating instrument of destruction. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. For Marine pilots, frustration turns to cold confidence. They are no longer spraying and praying, they are aiming a scalpel that cuts with the force of a battering ram. The Japanese notice instantly. Their pilots, who had learned to bait Corsairs into wasting ammunition, are now being systematically dismantled. A captured Japanese naval pilot, interrogated by Marine intelligence on October 24th, provides a chilling testimony. "The Corsair has changed," he says through a translator. "Before, their bullets were like rain, easy to fly through. Now their fire is a solid pillar. If it touches you, you cease to exist. We call them the Whispering Death no longer. We call them shredders." An intercepted radio transmission from November 3rd, 1943, confirms the fear. Warning to all units. American fighters have new guns. Their fire is concentrated like a spear. Previous evasion tactics are useless. Do not engage Corsairs inside 500 meters. Repeat, do not engage. The balance of power in the Pacific Air War hasn't just tilted, it has been violently overturned by one pilot's refusal to accept failure, and his simple, insane, and devastatingly effective idea. Word of Captain Sweat's success spread through the Solomon Islands faster than a radio signal. It wasn't official doctrine, it was a battlefield rumor whispered from one desperate pilot to another. Squadrons like VMF 214, Pappy Boyington's Black Sheep, heard the stories and started experimenting. They didn't wait for orders. They saw VMF 213's killboard explode and their casualty lists shrink. That was all the proof they needed. The modification, now unofficially dubbed the Sweat Special, became a contraband upgrade, passed between maintenance crews under the cover of darkness. The military bureaucracy, initially resistant, couldn't argue with the results. Gun camera footage was undeniable. What was once a scattered pattern of tracers hoping to hit something became a focused beam of pure destruction. A 1-second burst no longer just damaged an enemy plane, it vaporized it. By early 1944, the field modification was so widespread and its effects so profound that the Bureau of Aeronautics had no choice but to make it official. Manuals were hastily rewritten. What was once an insane, regulation-breaking idea became standard procedure for every F-4U Corsair in the Pacific Theater. The impact was a seismic shift in the air war. Marine Corsair kill-to-loss ratios, once a worrying 3-to-1, skyrocketed to over 0-to-1-inch squadrons using the modification. Pilot survival rates climbed dramatically. The psychological effect was just as potent. Japanese pilots, who had learned to exploit the Corsair's inaccurate fire, now faced a weapon that offered no escape. Allied pilots, in turn, flew with renewed confidence, knowing their 25 seconds of ammunition was now a reserve of guaranteed kills, not a prayerful spray. This single, ingenious change didn't just save ammunition, it saved hundreds of lives and shortened the brutal island-hopping campaign by ensuring American air superiority. Captain James Sweat never received an engineering award or a formal commendation for his life-saving innovation. His name isn't on any technical schematics. His legacy is written in the flight logs of the pilots who came home, in the battle reports that showed enemy losses mounting exponentially. He was a frontline innovator, a warrior who saw a fatal flaw in his own machinery and refused to accept it. His true contribution isn't measured in medals, but in the generation of Marine pilots who survived the Pacific because one of their own had the courage to break the rules to fix a problem that was killing them. He wasn't just an ace, he was the man who armed the aces.